that regardless of that setting, there would have been an expression or engagement on the issue. But I think what it has highlighted is that it's almost being acknowledged. And I think for a lot of the Muslim leaders as well, it's almost there was an invitation or a call out that, we are part of New Zealand, we are one, and there's almost like a need to kind of step up to that, or it's okay now to do so. And I think it's great that it's being acknowledged.
Interesting what West African scholar and author Fodi Drame, I hope I pronounced that correctly, said to the crowd, to quote, the knowledge in the land, that was the centre of their tradition. And when the French came, they took away slowly the land from the people, unquote. So I guess there's this shared story of colonisation, I suppose. Oh,
absolutely. And I think that's why, tikanga Maori or connection to tangata whenua is I think so profound for immigrants or former refugees is because that there is a feeling of shared history or experiences, and I think it's great to connect our differences together.
Right, very good. Very interesting stuff. Now, just on a final note, briefly, ending today with a question of staggering importance. What's the best way to stop yourself from falling asleep at meetings? Tim will know all about this.
Sorry, what was that? I was just dozing off.
The BBC has a handy selection of tips to stave off involuntary afternoon siesta. It says hold meetings at the right time, crucial, ideally early in the morning.
Yes.
I don't know. I just wanted to sort of around the panel on this one because
you just want to say no meetings at all, don't you?
Well, I'm not a. I'm going to put it out there. I'm not a big fan. Never have been a big fan. And a long time ago, 10, 15 years ago, a boss said to me that she never has meetings that go more than 15 minutes, and they always stand up.
Yes, the old standing meeting. Yeah,
what do you reckon?
Yeah, walk and talk. Yeah, it's appealing. Meetings, they serve a purpose. We are told these days that the importance of communication, of being able to, delegate and empower our staff and actually make sure people are informed about their workplaces. That requires these things called meetings, I guess, so that we can talk to each other. It depends what they are. If there's,
But companies overdo them. Why?
Why?
Whatamana?
It's a question that I haven't been able to answer myself.
God, the UN must be the UN. I kind of get a sense the UN's probably
Tell us about
lot of
that.
meetings.
I've been to quite a few meetings, but they are interesting. But yeah, I don't know. I think, it's going back to the age-old saying that a meeting that could have just been put in an email and sent through. But I don't know, I think it is important to kind of, have that face-to-face relation and interaction. It's just like you said about the content and the time of day and depending what else is going on at that time. I think it might be a little bit rude, but chewing bubblegum or having something to chew on kind of keeps me a bit...
Yeah.
And then you look slack and lazy.
Yeah.
No, I'm not a fan of that.
And the boss just throws out random questions. He's droning on for one and says, "What do you think, Jeremy?" and then, what?
What's the square root of 4?
What's your favourite toy?
All right, from Tim Watkin and Whatamata Bar and Wallace Chapman, that's us for Tuesday. Thanks very much for being with us.
Cheers.
Checkpoint next.
Kei te whakaronga mai koe ki te reo irarangi a Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. Welcome, I'm Alex Perrottet. On tonight's programme, shouts and demands outside Parliament today for an immediate halt to the state uplifting of Maori children. Green co-leader Marama Davidson calling it torture and abuse. We get the reaction from the Minister for Children, Tracy Martin. The Prime Minister under fire for choosing Tokelau over Iho Matau. Where should the PM be? And our calls by Simon Bridges that she's a part-time PM over the top. And despite the PM's efforts across the ditch, Australia is set to tighten even further its deportation regime. Did AUT cancel a Tiananmen Square remembrance event under Chinese government pressure? And tears over the loss of Auckland Zoo's last Sumatran tiger. We talked to the zookeeper who has known Barani all his life.
RNZ News at 5 o'clock. Good afternoon, I'm Paul Brennan. The organiser of a nationwide protest demanding change within Oranga Tamariki is calling for the head of the agency to step down. Hundreds of people have rallied around the country today demanding that the state stop taking Maori children from their parents. An open letter signed by more than 17,000 people was presented to Parliament this afternoon. Organiser Gwyneth Beard, known as Pee-wee, says Oranga Tamariki is a racist system and its Irish Chief Executive, Gráinne Moss, is unfit for the role.
It's all been whitewashed Maori. Why do we have someone that doesn't even belong to this country, that doesn't understand the treaty of Waitangi, that doesn't understand tikanga Maori, leading an organisation?
Gwyneth Beard says the youngest victim of suicide in state care is just 12 years old. Public health officials are still trying to identify the mystery illness that has forced a West Coast school to close. Westport North School, which has a roll of about 180 pupils, had 66 students away sick yesterday. It will be closed until at least Friday while all surfaces are disinfected. The Buller District Mayor, Gary Howard, says a public health officer has taken samples from the school. He says symptoms of the illness range from runny noses to headaches, high fevers and coughs.
Obviously a concern in the community when you've got so many going down with flus. I have spoken to school staff today and really just reiterating that they're taking precautionary measures and really wanting to get to the bottom and have a break from it just continuing throughout the school.
Gary Howard says no other schools in the area have reported significant numbers of sick students. The school's principal, Kath O'Loughlin, says it's more likely to be flu rather than a gastro bug. The National leader, Simon Bridges, has been labelled desperate and disrespectful for saying the Prime Minister should not have gone to Tokelau. Jacinda Ardern flew to the remote New Zealand territory on Saturday and is expected to return on Thursday. Mr Bridges this morning asked why Ms Ardern had left the country when everyday New Zealanders were worried about so many issues at home. He described her as a part-time Prime Minister. The Finance Minister, Grant Robertson, questioned what exactly Mr Bridges was getting at with his part-time dig at Ms Ardern.
And I don't quite know what Simon Bridges was saying when he said the phrase part-time Prime Minister. I do wonder if there's a bit of a sexist overtone in that.
Grant Robertson came out firing at Parliament's question time this afternoon, saying it was disrespectful to suggest the people of Tokelau were not everyday New Zealanders. The people at the centre of a Maori land dispute in South Auckland are disappointed the Prime Minister has not shown up. Today marks 1 week since protesting ramped up at Ihumato. Hundreds of people are still there trying to stop a major housing development, despite the iwi authority backing the build. They welcomed a visit from a paramount chief of the Cook Islands today, Pa Upokotini Auriki of Takitumu Waka. Erueti Rakina, who is part of the protest, says they are sad that Ms Ardern has not been responding to their attempts to communicate with her. The Australian government is discussing a radical change to visa requirements, which could see many more New Zealanders facing deportation. Successive New Zealand governments have raised concerns over the visa policy, with almost 1,600 Kiwi criminals deported to this country since the rules were tightened in 2014. Now, Canberra is considering whether it should have the right to cancel a visa of anyone who commits an offence that attracts a 2-year jail sentence, even if that sentence isn't imposed. Australian immigration researcher Henry Sherrill says if it becomes law, the proposal will have a massive impact.
People will now fail the character test if this bill passes, if they're guilty of a designated offence, which is punishable by at least 2 years jail. But they don't need to be sentenced to 2 years jail. They just need to commit a crime where the maximum punishment is 2 years.
Henry Sherrill. The proposed bill is now before a Senate committee, which is due to report back to Parliament in September. Businesses hurt by the construction of Auckland's City Rail link may be getting some relief. Shops around the Albert Street area in the central city say they've lost up to 40% of their revenue since construction began in 2015. They say the fences, diggers and the constant noise discourages customers from even visiting the area, let alone spending money. The Mayor Phil Goff, who has ruled out compensation in the past, says he's proposed an extreme hardship fund for the most affected. The plan would have to be agreed to by the government.
I'm not asking for a compensation fund. I'm simply saying that in the circumstances of extreme hardship, it would be good if council and government through CRL was able to provide some assistance to help people who have been affected in that way.
Mayor Phil Goff, the Minister of Transport Phil Twyford, says he's considering the proposal. It's 4 minutes past 5. On to RNZ Sport now. The Warriors captain Roger Tuivasa-Sheck insists they have moved on from the refereeing controversies of their loss to Parramatta last weekend. The NRL has admitted serious errors were made in the Eels' 24-22 win in Sydney, with 4 officials involved in the match dropped to reserve grade this week. Tuivasa-Sheck says there's no value in dwelling on that ahead of Friday night's game against the Raiders in Auckland, but admits it isn't easy at times trying to reason with the referees.
That part is tough, as captain, trying to chat with him, trying to make sure, we get fair call. At the time, I was real frustrated during the game, but, there's parts there that we can control, like I said before, about the tries that they scored. There are some soft tries from us, and we've got to put our hands up to that and try not get to that situation.
Roger Tuivasa-Sheck. The Tall Blacks coach Paul Henare says they've lost a lot of leadership with the withdrawal of captain Mika Vukona from the Basketball World Cup campaign. The 37-year-old power forward is out of action with a knee injury. Henare says Vukona is still a great player, but it's his other attributes that will be missed the most.
It's just his presence around the group, the leadership that he brings, not just on the floor, but off the floor as well. He's such a well-respected human being, first and foremost, that he has a way of bringing a group of guys together, and we'll be sorely missing that.
The World Cup starts in China in a month, with Henare having his final selection camp in Auckland this weekend. That's the news.
Taking on Oranga Tamariki.
We're talking about dismantling a flawed system that is dysfunctional, it is punitive and it's destructive. That's what the ministry is.
Taken to task over gun thefts.
So we've heard of people leaving their firearms in their vehicle, unlocked with even the keys in the vehicle. So that's just not on.
And turning to the next test.
Yeah, life goes on. No one's died. It feels like they have, but just enjoying being home and looking forward to cracking on and playing some good test cricket.
Cracking on. Morning Report with Susie Ferguson and Corin Dan, weekdays from 6, on air and online.
Then on 9 to noon, the most recent advances in bioplastics and why some have greener credentials than others. And after 10, the mother of Silk Road's founder on her fight for her son, who's serving double life in prison for creating the darknet drug marketplace. Join me, Catherine Ryan, on 9 to noon after Morning Report on RNZ National.
And we're funded through New Zealand On Air. Now the short forecast from Met Service taking us to midnight tomorrow, Wednesday. Northland, Auckland, Coromandel and Waikato. Showers, some heavy, frequent for a time tomorrow. Possible squally thunderstorms and hail. Waitomo to Kapiti, including Bay of Plenty in the central high country. Showers, some heavy, a period of rain tomorrow with possible thunderstorms and hail in the west. Snow to 500 metres later. Gisborne and Hawke's Bay, mainly fine. A few spots of rain this afternoon and tomorrow evening. Wellington and Wairarapa, a few showers, then rain tomorrow. Possible thunderstorms and hail. Nelson, Buller and Western, rain spreading north this afternoon, clearing to fine tomorrow. Canterbury and Marlborough, high cloud, rain with heavy falls developing tonight. Snow to 200 metres overnight, and then the rain eases to a few showers tomorrow. Otago, Southland and Fiordland, occasional rain or showers, snow down to 300 metres. And for the Chatham Islands, rain heavy for a time, showers tomorrow. 5:07.
Thanks very much, Paul. Good to have you with us on Checkpoint. Good to have you with us too. Listeners, viewers, wherever you're tuning in. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I am Alex Perrottet. Stop stealing Maori children. That was the stark message delivered to politicians on the steps of Parliament today by several hundred protesters who called for an immediate end to the uplift of Maori kids. The Hands Off Our Tamariki network handed an open letter signed by more than 17,000 people to Green Party co-leader Marama Davidson, demanding control be handed back to Maori. 3 inquiries are now underway into Oranga Tamariki's uplifts of children after an investigation into the attempted uplift of a newborn in Hawke's Bay Hospital. Now, since 2013, there's been a 20% increase in the number of Maori babies uplifted by the state. Our reporter Marnie Dunlop was at the rally in Wellington and filed this report.
Several hundred protesters braved rainy weather in Wellington to take their message to Parliament, demanding that uplifts of Māori children end immediately. Those at the rally, run by the Hands Off Our Tamariki network, shared their stories of children being taken from whānau and the intergenerational trauma it has caused. One mother, Stephanie, came to the march because she faced what she called an unnecessary 5-year battle in the family court because of Oranga Tamariki. She says her children were eventually returned to her, but they were broken and devastated children. She wants the government to listen to the concerns of parents like her.
I want to see evidence, solid evidence put before courts before any orders are made. Everybody deserves a chance.
Another protester, Lizzie Strickett, who works in maternal care research, was there to support Māori midwives.
This isn't a new fight. Māori midwives have been doing this for over 100 years to keep whānau protected. And I think that those within our system who are talking about this being a service issue or a broken system, this is incorrect. You know, this system was designed this way. It was designed to oppress and disconnect our whānau from one another. And no more, you know, our whānau are our model of health. They are the system that we need to be preserving and protecting.
The open letter calls on the government to stop stealing Māori children from their whakapapa and asks for the ministry in charge to be overhauled and restructured in line with kaupapa Māori. Oranga Tamariki came under renewed scrutiny this year after the attempted uplift of a newborn from its mother at Hawke's Bay Hospital. Jean Te Huia was one of the midwives at the centre of that case. She says Oranga Tamariki's policies are racist and it is continuing to hurt iwi and hapu.
We look at the statistics of children in state care today, they're third, fourth and fifth generation. So some of them are telling me that they are children of state care, their parents were and their grandparents were, and to me it looks like they're targeted. So we have intergenerational families of children who are going into care because they have already been preempted.
Academic Dr. Rawiri Waritini Karina says the practice of taking babies from Māori has been going on far too long. He says the state is participating in the annihilation of Māoridom.
If you think about the UN definition of genocide, well, part of that process is the taking of babies and giving them to caregivers not of that culture. And so for me, what that actually means, if that's the definition of genocide, why is Oranga Tamariki or even this New Zealand government implicit in genocidal practices?
He says enough is enough.
Māori for Māori, we need to look after our own, and we have the capacity, the aroha, because they're ours.
MPs, including the acting Prime Minister Calvin Davis, briefly addressed the protest, which was met with shouting from the crowd. He said he supports the Minister for Children, Tracy Martin, and her mahi, and says she is making the changes that the protesters are asking for. Tracy Martin says changes that kicked in at the start of this month ensure the ministry must commit to its Treaty of Waitangi obligations and prioritise the whakapapa of children in their care.
Everything they are asking for with regard to the fact that a government department cannot raise children, the fact that the best place for children is in loving families, all those things we don't disagree with.
Smaller protests were held in other centres today. In a statement, Oranga Tamariki says it acknowledges the protest action and it accepts that people feel strongly about these issues. In Te Whanganui Atara, ko Mani Dunlop tēnei.
And the Minister for Children, Tracy Martin, featured at the end of that package there from Mani Dunlop, will be on the programme a bit later in the evening. It's just coming up to 13 minutes past 5. The Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern is under fire for going overseas whilst the biggest Māori land dispute in decades continues here at home. Today marks a week since protesting ramped up at Ihumātao in South Auckland, and those gathered there say they're disappointed Jacinda Ardern hasn't turned up. And as our Māori news correspondent Lee Marama McLaughlin reports, National leader Simon Bridges agrees. He says the Prime Minister got her timing wrong and should not have gone to Tokelau.
As the Prime Minister continued her visit of the Tokelau Islands today, the Paramount Chief of Rarotonga brought the sun from the islands to Ihumātao, arriving at the site where hundreds are trying to stop a major housing development. Pa Upokotini Ariki of Takitamuvaka, with a lush flower crown, says it was important she turn up.
This is our people here. I come on my own capacity as Ariki to be here and to bring aroa and peaceful message to the whānau here.
Pa Ariki says she feels sorry for the people at Ihumātao who are fighting for their land. She says her own people are starting to encounter challenges with their traditional land, and the visit could be quite helpful.
It's very important for us as Indigenous people, because throughout the world, Indigenous people are not being looked after properly.
A member of the Paipai for Manawenua, Iruiti Rakina, says in Te Reo Māori that it was an honour to have her, and the visit boosted their spirits.
Te meharo, no mātou te honore I whai wā, I whai kā, I te kuine nei, te hara mai, te tautoko I tā mātou nei ko papa. Mea meharo rawa mātou, mātou te haukainga, Ina pōra I riro mai mātou I te rā me te karere ki a mātou kai te haramaia. I tāta nei ko mātou ki te rā whakarite he wāhi pai māna. E ai ki ana kōrero e he hea ia ki te noho tainoa ki te whakamoimati. So kai konei mo te rā kato. Kai raro I te rā me tarangi mahari.
It was this time last week that police came to evict members of Soul, Save Our Unique Landscape, who had been occupying the land for years to stop Fletcher from building houses there. The past week has seen the numbers of supporters climb to 5,000 at the weekend and drop back down to a few hundred today. On Friday, as she prepared to leave for her 6-day trip to Tokelau Islands, Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern put a hold on development until a resolution is found. But this morning in Parliament, Simon Bridges, who hasn't yet visited the site himself, took a swipe at her for leaving the country and not yet showing face.
When you've got the first Maori land occupations we've seen in a very long time, it beggars belief that the Prime Minister right now is in Tokelau. That we've just had a 3-week recess, we have Parliament on.
Sol would not speak to media today, but Mr Rakina says in Te Reo Māori that they're sad that Jacinda Ardern hasn't visited them or accepted an invitation to visit.
Tēnō pauri mātou. Ara noia kia whakahoki kōrero mai kia mātou. I konei a pēri, kai te pai, engari mohi o kia mātou he tāringa noiho a pēri. Tatari tōna na mātou.
Jacinda Ardern is expected back on Thursday and Kelvin Davis is acting Prime Minister. He arrived in Auckland this afternoon and plans to meet with stakeholders in the Ihumātao dispute over the coming days. The protesters are adamant they want written confirmation that no building will take place until a resolution is found, but Labour MP Willie Jackson says that won't happen.
They're going to have to just trust us, aren't they? But the reality is we're looking to the pressure's on the Māori caucus. We're working with our other ministers to find a resolution, and we're hopeful we might have some progress by the end of the week.
The numbers have been dwindling since the weekend, with a few hundred on site today, but the atmosphere remains jovial and calm. Prominent tāmoko artists have set up their tables at the heart of the site, giving facial moko to those who are keen. The big question is, when will those leading the fight be brought around the negotiating table? Mo te hōtaka o te ahi pōnei, ko Lee Marima McLaughlin tēnei.
It's 17 minutes past 5. You're with Checkpoint and RNZ National. I'm Alex Perrottet. We're keen for your feedback. You can get in touch on the text. 2101 is the number. Tweet us at checkpointrnz or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Now, anger over the deportation of New Zealand citizens from Australia is likely to intensify, with Canberra set to introduce even tighter visa requirements. Successive New Zealand governments have raised concern about the policy after nearly 1,600 Kiwi criminals were deported since the rules were tightened back in 2014. And now, Australia says it wants the right to cancel a visa of anyone who commits an offence that attracts a 2-year jail sentence, even if that sentence is not imposed. The ABC's Isabel Rowe reports.
Every week, migration agent Erina Moronga meets another New Zealander being threatened with deportation from Australia.
I spoke to one guy yesterday, he'd been here since he was 9 months old. When I said, you're a New Zealand citizen, go back to New Zealand, he said, no, I'm an Australian.
It's an increasingly common situation for migrants. In 2014, visa holders who had been sentenced to 12 months jail had their visas automatically cancelled. In a push to tighten the laws even more, the federal government is now hoping to cancel visas based on a potential jail sentence. Immigration researcher Henry Sherrill.
People will now fail the character test if this bill passes, if they're guilty of a designated offence, which is punishable by at least 2 years jail. But they don't need to be sentenced to 2 years jail. They just need to commit a crime where the maximum punishment is 2 years.
The change would be retrospective. Henry Sherrill, a former Labor Party advisor, explains visa holders who have previously passed the character test may find they no longer meet requirements under the new law.
Anyone who holds a visa who's a non-citizen, this is an automatic provision. They won't be automatically deported, but they will fail the character test, and then the department or the minister Minister will have a discretionary power to cancel their visa if they see fit.
Migration agents say the existing mandatory visa cancellation laws affect New Zealanders disproportionately. While Kiwis are allowed to stay indefinitely in Australia, their visa is still classed as temporary. About 1,600 New Zealand citizens have been sent back across the ditch since 2014, their visas revoked due to criminal offences in their past. Erina Morunga thinks it's unfair.
I deal with a lot of potential clients who are worried about, so they've been living in Australia for many years, they have had past convictions, they've not been on the wrong side of the law for even decades, but they're really worried about what they should do now.
Immigration Minister David Coleman makes no apologies for trying to tighten the laws even further.
Under this legislation, they will objectively fail the character test, and that's the case regardless of when they committed the offence, as it is with other parts of this Act.
If this is someone, though, who has lived in Australia all of their life, perhaps they committed this offence 20, 30 years ago, are you going to go back through records of these people and determine whether they should still have their visa?
Well, under the Migration Act already, people can have their visas cancelled for offences regardless of when those offences were committed. And the reality is what matters is the offence. And we are talking about very serious offences here.
The bill is set to further push the friendship between New Zealand and Australia. During a visit, New Zealand Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern condemned Australia's current policy.
We have seen cases where there is also almost no connection of an individual to New Zealand who had been deported. I consider that to be a corrosive part of that policy.
But Minister David Coleman says Kiwis are being treated the same as every other visa holder.
If they're from New Zealand or France or the UK or anywhere, obviously laws should apply equally to people, no matter what country they're from.
The bill has been referred to a Senate committee, which is due to report back in September.
Isabel Rowe with that report at 21.5 minutes past 5. A West Coast school hopes to reopen its doors on Friday after it was forced to shut when more than a third of its pupils became sick. Westport North School says 66 pupils were away due to illness, and it decided yesterday to close the school for at least 3 days so all surfaces could be cleaned and disinfected. School Principal Kath O'Loughlin explains what happened.
Started last week, we had quite a few children sick with high temperatures and headaches. We noticed on Wednesday that we had particularly high numbers. It was about 44. Thursday, about the same, and we were sending children home about 6 a day.
Wow.
On Monday, when we came to school, we had 66 children away, and we sent 3 home. So it was then that, after talking to the Health Department and the Ministry of Education, that our Board of Trustees decided to close.
And what sort of percentage of the school numbers are 60, did you say?
66. Well, we sent 69 home that day, and we were a school of 221.
Right.
So just under half.
Wow. And so you're saying this spread in a number of days. I guess you don't have it clear what you're putting it down to, but what does it seem like to you?
Early indications seem that it is a influenza virus. It's definitely not a gastroenteritis type illness because we don't have vomiting and diarrhoea. It is just dehydration, headaches and high fevers with a little bit of vomiting with some children, but that's to be expected with high fevers.
Right, so you've shut the school and you've sent everyone else home. How long do you think for?
We will reopen on Friday, hopefully. No one likes to be closed for long. Today, we met with the public health nurse and took advice from her. We have bleached all the classrooms and all the surfaces. We've got a team from Christchurch coming overnight who have graciously come forward out of the blue and are going to deep clean the school to ensure that there's no continued infection. And then we will reopen on Friday. We felt 3 days was long enough to give the children time to recover and to stop the spread.
Mm-hmm. And so what message are you sending to parents at the moment?
I've just reiterated on Facebook that I thank them for their support. I've given them an update on what we've done with cleaning the school and with the public health nurse taking swabs, and I've reiterated that it is nothing to do with the water supply.
Right, so there were some concerns by some parents, were they, about the possibility of it being the water?
Well, what happened last week was we had very heavy rain and the river was pretty dirty, and there was concerns that the water was a bit brown, so there was a cautionary boil water notice. Having said that, the council was continually testing the water, and there were no issues with the water, but it was on boil water. So at school we had closed our drinking fountains, we had given the children all the messages, the parents knew, and we had water at school. So, And then when they lifted the water, they retested it again, and there was no issues with the water.
Right. So, Kath, I mean, obviously you're trying to reopen on Friday, but I guess you're not expecting the full roll of students back. Can you just go through for us once again what the main symptoms are? And of course, you'd be instructing parents, if the children have any of those symptoms, not to send them to school.
Absolutely, because as you know, when children come back too soon, they infect other children. It's just a vicious cycle. This was one of the ways that we tried to stop it. So we are telling parents that not to send their children to school for 48 hours after the last symptoms, headaches or a fever, to give them plenty of rest, plenty of fluids, and we'll take it from there.
So they're flu-like symptoms, it's not a gastro bug?
No, there's no indication that it's a gastro at this stage.
Kath, how are the teachers? Any infected?
We have some support staff who are sick at the moment. The teachers have been amazing. If you'd seen them all this morning, donning their cleaning gear and heads down, bleaching the whole classrooms, day in the life of a teacher. It's amazing.
Kath O'Loughlin, the principal of Westport North School, giving her teachers a good rap there for all their hard work cleaning up after what looks like some type of epidemic there at Westport North School. Hopefully students will be back when the school opens this Friday. It's coming up to 27 minutes past 5. Police in the German city of Frankfurt have launched a murder investigation after a horror incident at the city's train station. A young boy has died after he was pushed onto train tracks in front of an approaching train. His mother was also pushed but survived. A 40-year-old man is now in custody. Alex Jabowski from German broadcaster Deutsche Welle has this report.
The attack met with widespread horror across Germany. While the 40-year-old mother was able to get off the track, her son was fatally hit by an incoming high-speed train.
The main suspect, a 40-year-old man, fled the scene. Some eyewitnesses reported this to us. We were able to track him down with the help of civilians, and he was detained near the station. He is currently being questioned about the incident and his motives. At the moment, I can't say why he might have done it.
While a clear motive has not been established, police and prosecution are working on an early theory.
Right now, we believe the two parties did not know each other, that there was no relationship between the victims and the perpetrator. So we are still unsure about a possible motive.
People in Frankfurt are appalled.
I'm so sorry for the woman, the child, all the bystanders, and of course the driver of the train. I have 3 children myself, and the first thing I thought was how my daughter is the same age. My feeling is indescribable. I just can't understand how somebody could do something like this.
Besides questioning the suspect, police are working with eyewitnesses to gather more information. The mother is being treated in a hospital.
Alex Jabowski with that report. At 28.5 minutes past 5, both the Napier City Council and opponents of a controversial $41 million pool development are claiming victory after a High Court order froze the awarding of a contract to build the centre. The interim injunction means the council's preferred builder cannot sign on the dotted line until the court decides whether the council failed to properly consult the public over its decision to build the new pool in the first place. Our Hawke's Bay reporter Anusha Bradley with the latest on this saga.
The Napier City Council was close to awarding a contract to its preferred contractor, but the tender process is now on hold until a judicial review hearing in September. The decision follows legal action by the Friends of Onikawa Aquatic Centre Society, which was unhappy with the council's consultation process and its decision to demolish Onikawa Aquatic Centre near the city centre and establish a new pool complex on Predmonson Drive. The Society's chair, Graham Sutherland, says today's court order is a great result.
There's been a lot of work put into what we've done so far, and we're very pleased with this interim injunction. We're now working very diligently to bring the full court case to fruition in September.
But the Napier City Council is also applauding the order. It says that's because while it can't award the contract, it can continue with selecting its preferred contractor, continue with groundworks and apply for a resource consent. A council spokesperson told RNZ it would not have signed a contract anyway until the outcome of the judicial review was known. One of the 6 councillors who voted against the pool, Kirsten Wise, says the publicly notified resource consent to be heard by independent commissioners will give the public another chance to have their say on the issue.
There was inadequate community consultation on the proposed new pool. So that within itself will give members of the community the opportunity to have further input and submit any concerns they have.
Councillor Maxine Bogue, who also voted against the pool, says the council has a history of not listening to its ratepayers.
This is the second High Court case we've had in just over a year. Last year we were challenged for our consultation on the Easter Sunday trading. So there is a message there about consultation, and it'll be interesting to see how this proceeds.
Councillor Keith Price, who voted for the new pool, says today's decision isn't a setback at all.
It's not stopping progress. We can go on with putting the soil in place, getting all the documentation in place, resource hearing. I mean, I had quite an involvement in marine trade, and I've got to say 3 years ago people were a little bit anti that. Now they're very pro it.
It's very likely the pool's future may actually be decided by an entirely new council. A 3-day hearing for the judicial review is set to begin on September 30th, just days before the local government elections on October 12th, which is sure to make it a key election issue. In Napier for Checkpoint, Anusha Bradley.
It's 29 minutes to 6 on Checkpoint and RNZ National. Coming up is a hardship fund in the offing for businesses hurt by the construction of Auckland's City Rail Link. AUT denies it was pressured by China to cancel a Tiananmen Square anniversary event. And South Island ski fields rejoice. Finally, real snow is starting to fall. We'd love your feedback. You can text us on 2101. You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, Facebook us, Checkpoint, or on the email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Business is coming up. But first, here's Paul Brennan with the headlines.
Thank you, Alex. Hundreds of protesters around the country have been demanding that the state stop taking Maori children from their parents. An open letter signed by more than 17,000 people was presented to Parliament this afternoon calling for change within Oranga Tamariki. Protest organiser Gwyneth Beard says the ministry operates a racist system and its chief executive, Gráinne Moss, is unfit for the role. Westport North Primary School's principal says a mystery illness that's closed the school is more likely to be flu than a gastro bug. About a third of pupils have fallen ill with fever and vomiting, and public health officials are investigating samples taken from the school. It will be shut until Friday while all surfaces are disinfected. The Finance Minister has slammed Nationals leader in Parliament over his criticism of the Prime Minister's trip to Tokilo. Simon Bridges asked why Jacinda Ardern had left the country when everyday New Zealanders are worried about so many issues at home. Grant Robertson says it's disrespectful to suggest the people of Tokilo are not everyday New Zealanders. The Australian government is considering further radical change to visas, which could affect more New Zealanders. About 1,600 New Zealanders with criminal records have been deported from Australia since the rules were tightened in 2014. A Senate committee is now discussing whether to cancel the visa of anyone who commits an offence punishable by 2 years in jail, even if that sentence isn't imposed. Transport Minister Phil Twyford says he's considering a proposal by the Auckland Mayor to compensate businesses hurt by ongoing work on the City Rail Link. Shops around Albert Street say they've lost up to 40% of their revenue since construction began in 2015. Phil Goff says he's proposed an extreme hardship fund for those most affected. Drivers are being warned to expect snow, ice and heavy rain on highways around the South Island tonight. Met Service has issued snowfall warnings to 300 metres for Haast Pass, Linders Pass and the Crown Range Road, effective from this afternoon. Snow is also expected on Arthur's and Porter's Passes overnight and Lewis Pass tomorrow morning. And those are the headlines.
Thanks very much, Paul. We've got Nona Peltier here in the studio for business. How are you?
I'm well, thank you. And you?
Yeah, very, very well, and very interested because the Rugby World Cup's coming up, and it seems that Spark Sport have done a deal with their rival Sky to bring us the games.
That's true. They have.
How does that work?
It's a confusing scenario, but look, it's a win-win for both companies from what I can tell. So that means their customers are going to be better off, both sides.
Sure.
So how it works is basically Spark has the rights, but they don't have the coverage, the reach necessarily to get into some of those rural pubs and clubs, in places where the broadband might not be good enough. So
that was the concern people had when they won the rights, right?
That's right. And so they came to an agreement, these rival firms. And how it works is this. If you are, and this is only for commercial customers.
So the subscriber at home...
It's not for home, no. It's just commercial. These are people who subscribe and show the programs
in a pub,
or a club, that kind of thing. Yeah. So how it works is if you are a Sky customer, you can use your own equipment. You don't have to go and get any Spark equipment. You don't have to worry about broadband. You will be able to show the series through the Sky, and all you will do is you will pay a sort of a pop-up fee, which will go directly to Spark. It won't even go to Sky.
So Sky's not getting anything, they're just carrying...
They're just making sure that their customers are being looked after, so that's a win for Sky, so their customers stick with them, right? Yeah. And on the other hand, if you don't want to go that route, you can just get the broadband that Spark provides. But, that box is, about $300? Then you're going to have installation costs, and you're going to still have to pay $80. But that's all you're going to have to pay for a commercial customer who wants to show that in their pub or club. There you go. Now, the difference in price is like hundreds of dollars if you go through the Sky option. But this is all for commercial customers, so for everyday people, it's not an issue at all.
What do they do?
Well, you can just...
you just got to buy it through Spark.
You can get it, or go to the pub. If you can't get it at home, who knows? I don't know. I haven't worked it out. It's not my business. Actually, I have to tell you, it was really hard to get this much information out of these guys. Everything is confidential, so you really had to dig deep.
Okay.
Yeah.
We'll keep digging. People need answers to these questions.
But I don't have any answers for the residential customers. But I'm sure if they can do a deal for the commercial ones, they'll do a deal for the residential ones. You can be sure of that, right?
Still got, a month or two less than that. Look, building consents are up, and this is high.
There's another bit of interesting news, isn't it? Yeah, a rise of 13. That's 13%, not 30%.
Sorry, we're talking Auckland, let's make it clear.
No, that's all up. Now, most of the consents were issued these are for houses in Auckland. Yeah, they'd hit a record high, 13% increase. So nationally, the numbers were definitely up as well, with solid growth in a number of regions. And although the economists that have been looking at this don't think it's going to last. So we've seen building confidence come off, but building consents in that sector are still very strong. It's hard to tell what people think and what they do. It seems to be a separation between the two.
He's saying that systems have got better. The consent system is more efficient.
The consent system may have got better, but sentiment is still down. I can tell you that for certain.
Wow.
Yeah.
What about the markets? Are they up or down?
Well, they're interesting too. They're definitely in a very rosy spot, I must say. The NZX rose 0.25%. That's 28 points up to 10,879. And the ASX Composite is at a record high. So we're really close to a record here in New Zealand, at a record level in Australia. And overall, the markets are quite buoyant. And that's because there's anticipation that the Federal Reserve will cut interest rates this week. So, I guess it depends on which side of the ledger you're running. But it's a good market today, and our dollar is trading at 66.3 US cents, which is just where it was this morning, 96.1 Australian, again where we were, and 54.6 British pence.
Thanks very much, Nona. Thanks for joining us and keeping us up to date. Find out about that Rugby World Cup.
I'll do my very best. I'll be on to it every day.
Thanks very much. It's coming up to 21 minutes to 6. AUT University is denying the Chinese government pressured it into cancelling a booking for an event marking the 30th anniversary of the bloody crackdown on protests in Tiananmen Square in Beijing. The university has confirmed it canned the room reservation after a request from China's Vice Consul General, but says it only did so because the booking did not follow the right process. The Tertiary Education Union says that doesn't sound credible. Here's our education correspondent, John Gerritsen.
Messages obtained by Newsroom under the Official Information Act show the 30th anniversary commemoration was cancelled after the Chinese consulate in Auckland contacted the university opposing the event. Emails show AUT's Vice-Chancellor Derek McCormick reminded the consulate that academic freedom was important, but in this instance, their concerns and AUT's concerns had coincided. Today, he told Checkpoint the Chinese brought the event to the university's attention but did not threaten repercussions if it failed to act.
The Vice Consul General pointed out that we had a good relationship with China, that we had lots of Chinese students, and he hoped that because of that good relationship we could help them out and cancel something that they objected to. So again, we didn't know what it was.
Mr McCormick says the university looked into the booking and cancelled it because it was not made properly.
It needs to be done in the proper manner for all sorts of reasons, including health and safety. There are also charges that are made for rooms because of cleaning and setup and utilities. These things were bypassed by the person who made the booking. In fact, they did not even make the booking in their own name. So it was something that was completely out of order.
Mr McCormick says AUT recently hosted a film screening the Chinese government had objected to, and if the reservation had been made correctly, the Tiananmen Square event would have gone ahead. The National Secretary of the Tertiary Education Union, Sian Riggs, says universities sometimes run into problems with room bookings, but she's dubious about AUT's excuse.
Hardly seems credible, does it? I mean, that is the public position that the university is putting out, but I guess from our point of view, that seems like a fairly lame reason to have cancelled the event. I guess our view would be that it's not dealing with the underlying issues of relationships with foreign governments.
Ms Riggs says universities are too reliant on tuition fees from Chinese students.
When so many of our universities now are reliant on the fees that international students pay, and, you know, in AUT's case, it's quite a significant chunk of their annual income, it's inevitable that foreign governments are going to have the ability to put pressure on institutions should they want to. And I think in this case, that's exactly what the Chinese government has done.
The government's relationship with China has been under scrutiny all year, and today the Education Minister, Chris Hipkins, said freedom of expression was not negotiable.
The relationship with China and with the Chinese government is very important to the New Zealand government. It's very important to a number of the tertiary education institutions in New Zealand. But that's always got to be on the basis of mutual respect and mutual respect for the values of the other country. And in New Zealand, free speech, the right to democratic protest, those are very important things to New Zealanders. And we've always been very clear with the Chinese government that those are things that we will always defend here in New Zealand.
Mr Hipkins would not pass judgment on AUT's decision, but it appears that institutes that take Chinese students' money may also face pressure from their government. RNZ has approached the Chinese consulate for comment, but has not received a response. Mo te hōtaka o te ahi, ko John Gerritsen tēnei.
At 18 minutes to 6, some sad news. Auckland Zoo's last remaining Sumatran tiger has been put down after a long illness. 11-year-old Berani was part of an international breeding program for the endangered species and was born with 2 siblings who were then sent across the Tasman to Sydney. Their mother died last year, and since then Berani has been on his own. Team leader of carnivores at Auckland Zoo, Lauren Booth, was with Berani from the day he was born. In a sense, it's a true love story. At times, through tears, she told me his illness had got worse lately and they had run out of options.
Unfortunately, it was a type of condition that is very, very hard to diagnose and then even more difficult to treat. And we had unfortunately reached the point where there was nothing else possible that we could try for him. And so due to decrease in his welfare as part of this disease, we had to make the decision to euthanize him, which was really devastating for us, as you can imagine.
Yeah. And I guess there's an idea out there. I mean, I know that tigers can live much longer than Berani lived for, and maybe that plays into people's minds in terms of that idea that these animals in zoos don't really realise their full potential. What do you say to that in terms of Berani's life?
Yeah, so most animals in captivity do live much longer than they would in the wild, and it is unfortunate that Berani, due to his the gastrointestinal disease that he did he did die younger than he would have. But I guess what I would say is that it's very similar to people. I mean, we also should live a lot longer than sometimes some of us should live a lot longer, or we think we should live a lot longer than we do. But unfortunately, we face the same types of illnesses as well to a great degree, and they just manifest themselves differently. So it's just like people. Some of us go before our time as well.
Now, Barani had a couple of siblings and they were sent away, and then his mother died not so long ago as well. Are tigers social? I mean, you said they're a bit like humans. Humans are social. I know chimpanzees are, and zoos always try to get the right mix and make sure that they grow together and can live together. Did Barani need more friends around him?
So tigers are solitary by nature, so they don't require the same social structures many other species, as you mentioned, like chimpanzees, for example.
Mm-hmm.
But he had lived with his mother from a very young age, and we were able to manage them in together. We were quite lucky to be able to do that. But they had their own space within that environment, even though they did have a close relationship. So yeah, they're a bit of a different situation compared to, say, your chimpanzees or other social species.
So what's the zoo going to do now? Because you've been building a new tiger enclosure and you've just lost your last tiger. Are you on the lookout for a replacement?
So as part of our long-term plan, even obviously while Barani was still with us, and we were expecting him to be with us into the future to this new exhibit, but as part of that we were looking at acquiring more tigers to share that space with him. So that's still on the cards, and that's still something we're planning for in the future.
And why do we need to have tigers in zoos? People take interest in the overall tiger numbers. They've been scaling down and they are endangered, although I think in recent years, worldwide numbers may have I think the graph might be turning around, but it's still a concern. I mean, how is it important in terms of the work that the zoo does with tigers?
So in regards to Sumatran tigers, they're still considered critically endangered, and their population trend is still decreasing. There are as few as 400 left in the wild, which means things are pretty dire out there for them. And if there aren't places like Auckland Zoo who are raising awareness and also raising funds to send to places like Wildcats Conservation Alliance to support the conservation work out there in the wild, things are really not looking good for tigers or for Sumatran tigers. A great example of this is the anti-poaching units that Auckland Zoo support through Wildcats Conservation Alliance. Where those anti-poaching units operate, tiger numbers are stabilising and increasing. But if there are no funds for those units, then tiger numbers are going to be hit really, really hard. And it is estimated that if numbers keep decreasing in Sumatra the way that they could be extinct in the wild within the next 10 years. And so that's our lifetime. And no one wants that, because you come to the zoo, you see a beautiful, beautiful tiger like Barani, and you realise that, there's Baranis out there in the wild that are having a really, really hard time, and we've got to do what we can to save them, and by helping connect our visitors with these animals, we can actually secure a future for tigers in the wild, and hopefully none of us will ever have to live in a world without tigers.
So, Lauren, you're obviously very, very connected to Barani, and it's all still very fresh. Maybe we can finish with perhaps your fondest memory of Barani.
My fondest memory of Barani? Probably something really, really simple. I just love the way that you could come in the mornings, and sometimes you'd call him inside for his breakfast, and you'd just be like, why don't you come inside for breakfast? But he'd just be out, sitting up on a platform, just looking out over the zoo and just taking in the sights and the sounds. And he just would have this look on his face, these slightly sleepy eyes and this big fluffy face, and just looking so regal and content and just so, just so handsome, and it's hard to put into words. It's just his whole persona, completely dignified and adorable, because you knew that he also was incredibly goofy, and it was just that almost contradiction in his personality. It was, the awe that he could inspire, even in someone like myself who had the privilege of working with him, every day, from pretty much the day he was born. You just can never lose that sense of awe, and that's what I think I love the most about working with him.
Lauren Booth there from Auckland Zoo on a touching interview about Barani, a Sumatran tiger, the last Sumatran tiger surviving at Auckland Zoo. She says she's going to try to get a replacement one, but no plans yet. And they've built a new tiger enclosure, so hopefully they'll have some animal that can live there soon. It's coming up to 11 minutes to 6, and I'm Alex Perrottet. You're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Some people have been getting in touch about the criticism levelled at the Prime Minister over her trip to Tokelau, and this is amid the Ihumatao land disputes. The opposition leader, Simon Bridges, saying that she should be here, and she's a part-time PM. Gail has got in touch and says, are Tokelauans not New Zealanders too? She says this trip would have taken months to organise. Simon Bridges is a stirrer and shows scant understanding of real leadership. Thanks for that, Gail. Someone else on the text. So Simon Bridges is contradicting himself again. Jacinda should butt out, but she should also be back sorting it out. And finally, from the other side, another person on the text says, at least you would think our part-time PM would answer some questions on Ihumatao while away. You can get in touch on the text 2101 is the number. You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Coming up to 9 minutes to 6. Investigations are underway in California to try and establish a motive in America's latest shooting. 3 people were killed, including 2 children, when a gunman armed with an assault rifle opened fire at a garlic festival in the town of Gilroy. He was shot dead by the police at the scene. From Gilroy, CNN's Sarah Sidner has this report.
Oh, they shoot him! After all this chaos and panic at the Gilroy Garlic Festival, today a search for answers. Police now identifying the gunman as 19-year-old Santino William Legan, saying he was armed with an AK-47 style assault rifle purchased legally in Nevada 3 weeks ago.
And despite the fact that they were outgunned with their handguns against a rifle, those 3 officers were able to fatally wound that suspect.
Police now trying to figure out why.
Our preeminent and principal concern at this point is motivation, ideological leanings. Was he affiliated with anyone or any group?
An Instagram account created 4 days ago under the suspect's name with 2 images posted shortly before the shooting. One is a photo taken from the Garlic Festival. The other, posted an hour later, is a photo of Smokey Bear warning of high fire danger. The caption recommends reading a white supremacist book. Police say Legan entered the festival by cutting through a fence around the property, avoiding security.
I seen him shooting at everyone. It looked like he just wanted to shoot at everyone. He didn't have no direct target.
They're still investigating witness reports of a second suspect, but believe Legan was the only shooter.
You could hear bullets, and the bullets were hitting the ground. You could see them go up, and that's what I called out. It's a real gun.
We also now know that 2 of the 3 people killed were children. A 13-year-old girl and a 6-year-old boy named Stephen Romero.
I couldn't believe what was happening. They told me he was in critical condition, that they were working on him, and then 5 minutes later they told me that he was dead.
Police say they engaged the shooter within 1 minute of the shooting, but by then he had already killed 3 people and he had wounded 12 others.
That's Sarah Sidner in Gilroy, California. The festival shooting is the 246th mass shooting in the United States this year. Boris Johnson has been roundly booed by crowds in Edinburgh during his first visit to Scotland as British Prime Minister. Mr Johnson shared a frosty handshake with Scotland's First Minister Nicola Sturgeon before going inside her official residence for talks. After the meeting, Ms Sturgeon said it's clear Boris Johnson is dangerously pursuing a no-deal Brexit. From Edinburgh, here's the BBC's Scotland editor, Sarah Smith.
For Boris Johnson, coming here to the Scottish First Minister's official residence in Edinburgh just days after becoming Prime Minister is a carefully choreographed piece of diplomacy that wasn't universally popular.
But Boris Johnson meeting Nicola Sturgeon face to face will not help them see eye to eye over Brexit.
Not even close.
Good morning. Good morning. How are you?
Visiting a Vanguard-class nuclear submarine on the Clyde, Boris Johnson wants the EU to know he is ready for a battle. Yet, despite supercharging no-deal preparations, he's also saying he will go the extra mile to try to get a deal.
It is absolutely right that we should go for a deal, and there is every chance that we can get a deal. And I think with goodwill and with common sense, that is what we will achieve.
So are the odds still 1,000,000 to 1 that we will leave with no deal?
Provided there is sufficient goodwill and common sense on the part of our partners, that is exactly where I would put the odds.
Any chance of a no-deal Brexit, even at 1,000,000 to 1, won't satisfy Nicola Sturgeon, who says no deal would be catastrophic and should not ever be considered.
This government and the path that it is pursuing, I think, is dangerous. It became clear to me that this government, the new Prime Minister, has set the UK on an almost inevitable path to a no-deal Brexit. The position that it has taken makes it very difficult to see how any deal can be struck with the EU, and I think that would be catastrophic for Scotland and indeed for the whole of the UK.
That is not good enough. The Scottish Tory leader and Mr Johnson clashed over Brexit 3 years ago, and they still don't agree. She says she will not support no deal. They met again today.
I said that I wanted to see the same level of energy and vigour that's going into no deal planning, going into trying to get a deal. I wanted to see the sort of shuttle diplomacy that's going to be required if we're going to see changes that can be brought back to the House of Commons, and I received the assurances that I was looking for.
Hi, Boris! Boris Johnson has some fans in Scotland, and the SNP are also delighted he's now Prime Minister, convinced he will inevitably increase the appetite for Scottish independence.
Sarah Smith in Edinburgh at 6:04. Some South Island ski fields are breathing a sigh of relief as heavy snow begins to fall this evening. This comes during what's been called a very mild winter, with ski fields relying on snowmakers to keep the punters coming. One ski field says this is one of the driest winters they've seen in 30 years. But now a huge snow dump is expected, with Met Service issuing a heavy snow warning for the first time this winter. Our South Island reporter Logan Church has more.
The ski season started with a bang, with heavy snow making ideal skiing and snowboarding conditions. But snow-wise, that's really been it. Coronet's Peak Ski Area Manager Nigel Kerr says that snowmakers have been working hard.
It's probably fairly normal. It's just that there's no natural snow to mix in with it, which is more, well, not none, but very little. And that's what we're missing this year.
How does that compare to previous years?
Well, there's years that have been worse than this, if you look at our snowfall records. But this is not a great year for natural snow. This is one of the drier of what I can recall in the last 30-odd years.
Nigel Kerr says the conditions have hit visitor numbers.
We're certainly well behind on last year. Last year was a really good year. But looking historically, we're sitting probably just slightly under average at the moment. So, I think our end result is going to be okay. It's going to be quite a good year, but it's not going to be a glamour year, that's for sure.
And nearby Cardrona has seen similar drops in numbers. Its General Manager, Bridget Legnovsky, says it's had to prioritise what fields to use its snowmakers on.
June was a little flat, and I think partly or mainly to do with snow and the noise around snow, the fact that it's not naturally snowing, and people get really excited about natural snowfalls. If we get the snow now, that'll take us right to August.
Met Service forecaster Peter Little says this winter has been very mild so far.
It has been mild. Temperatures have been running a degree or so above average, and we've seen very little snow. The ski fields certainly have been quite bare compared to what they normally have. But this is the first really decent cold outbreak and the first snow warning we've had for the year.
Snow is expected to fall above 400 metres in the Kaikoura Ranges, the Canterbury High Country and central Otago.
We have a cold front moves over southern New Zealand today, and then it moves over the remainder of the country during Wednesday. That's followed by a very, very cold southerly outbreak of very cold air, and that's going to bring snow down to low levels, particularly in the south and east of the South Island.
Heavy snow warnings are now in place for most of the South Island Alpine passes, as well as Crown Range Road and Milford Road. The same warnings are also in place up in the North Island for the Desert Road and Rimutaka Hill Road. And both Cardrona and Coronet Peak are welcoming it, and are now expecting a good combination of natural snow and man-made snow to bring in more people.
We've been a little bit unlucky, I would say, with a couple of the first snowfalls that's gone around us rather than on us, but you know, like I said, our time is now, and so we're looking forward to that.
So the message is wrap up warm and get out your skis. Snow, and not just the man-made stuff, is coming. For Checkpoint, Logan Church.
Thanks very much, Logan. If you're in the South Island, head to the slopes. Big snow dump coming tonight. And there's a little bit of time for some feedback before we get to the news on the Oranga Tamariki uplifts. Christine's got in touch. She says it's a pity that James Whakaruru, Dilcelia Whittaker, Nia Glassy and Chris and crew Kahui were left in the care of their, and then, quote, loving families, unquote, and not uplifted by the state. They might all still be alive if they had been. That's from Christine. Thanks for your point of view. Andy has got in touch, quoting, take your hands off our tamariki, which was shouted out at Parliament today. I never thought, this is Andy, I would hear sentiments like that from anyone in New Zealand, a country I've always been proud of living in. I hate racism, I hate apartheid. The Treaty of Waitangi never envisaged two nations, two languages, two cultures, two social welfare departments, two judicial systems. We are one people. Thanks, Andy. We will have the Minister for Children, Tracy Martin, after the news.
RNZ News at 6. Kia ora. Good evening, I'm Paul Brennan. Hundreds of people have today demanded that the state stop taking Maori children from their parents. An open letter signed by more than 17,000 people was presented to Parliament this afternoon, protesting against Oranga Tamariki removing children from whānau. Hamish Cardwell has more.
Despite the rain, more than 300 people turned out in Wellington with a simple message: stop taking our tamariki. A midwife, Jean Tuhuia, says Oranga Tamariki's practices are racist and hurt iwi, hapu and whānau. The acting Prime Minister, Kelvin Davis, briefly addressed the crowd and was met with shouting. He said while too many Māori tamariki are in state care, he accepts that children sometimes need to be taken from unsafe home environments. Oranga Tamariki said in a statement it wants what the protesters want, to keep children safe. Ko Hamish Cardwell tēnei.
The principal at Westport North School says a mystery illness has forced it to close, and it's likely to be a type of influenza. The school, which has about 180 pupils, had 66 students away sick yesterday. The public health nurse, or a public health nurse, is testing samples to determine what the illness might be, and results are expected within 48 hours. Principal Kath O'Loughlin says the symptoms of the illness, which include high fevers, headaches and vomiting, indicate that it's a type of influenza rather than a gastro bug. She says the school will be reopening on Friday after thoroughly disinfecting all surfaces, but she's not expecting all students to be back by then.
I know that when the public health nurse was meeting with these families, the children that she saw were fairly sick and said the families intimated they wouldn't be back on Friday when we reopen.
Westport North School Principal Kath O'Loughlin. The people at the centre of a Maori land dispute in South Auckland are disappointed the Prime Minister has not shown up. Today marks 1 week since protests ramped up at Ihumato to stop a major housing development there. Our Māori News correspondent Lee Marama McLaughlin reports.
Jacinda Ardern set off for the Tokelau Islands on Saturday, but not before putting a hold on building at Ihumatao until a resolution is found. Makaurau Marae representative Iruiti Dakina says it's disappointing that she did not and has not visited them. He says they are also sad that she's not responded to their attempts to contact her. The leader of the opposition, Simon Bridges, says the Prime Minister should not have gone away while the dispute was underway. He says this is one of the major Māori land disputes in decades and she should be in the country dealing with it. Ko Lee Marama McLaughlin tēnei.
Auckland University of Technology has denied bowing to Chinese government pressure to stop an event marking the 30th anniversary of the crackdown on protests in Beijing's Tiananmen Square. It says it cancelled a room reservation for the event only because of problems with the booking. Our education correspondent John Gerritsen reports.
AUT cancelled the booking after a meeting with Chinese officials. It says a staff member booked the room for a student seminar when it was in fact for an external group on a public holiday when the university's buildings were closed. The university says it has hosted events in the past that the Chinese government has objected to, and the booking would have been allowed to stand if it had been made properly. The Tertiary Education Union doubts AUT's explanation and says the situation highlights New Zealand's reliance on income from Chinese students. Ko John Gerritsen tēnei.
Police have confirmed that bones found in scrub in the far north yesterday are human remains. Power company workers made the grim discovery yesterday at Taipa in Doubtless Bay. Detective Inspector Rhys Johnston says top energy workers trimming trees under power lines spotted the bones as they cleared scrub. He says they're definitely human and appear to have been there for some time. Mr Johnston says Far North Police have a number of unsolved missing persons cases on file and they're following strong leads on the identity of the remains. The terrain is challenging and specialist search and rescue teams are helping police with their work. Police expect to recover the bones from the Taipa site tomorrow for a post-mortem. Heavy snow is beginning to fall in the South Island to the relief of ski fields that say it's been a very mild winter. Met Service has issued its first heavy snow warning of the season and is predicting snow to fall to 200 metres in some areas overnight. At Coronet Peak, ski area manager Nigel Kerr is hoping tonight's fall will amount to a better snow base. He says so far they've had to rely largely on snowmakers to operate.
This is not a great year for natural snow. This is one of the drier of what I can recall in the last 30-odd years.
Coronet Peak ski area manager Nigel Kerr there. It's 4 minutes past 6. On to RNZ Sport now. The Tall Blacks have suffered a huge blow ahead of the Basketball World Cup with long-time captain and talisman Mika Vukona ruled out of the tournament in China in a month's time. The 37-year-old has failed to recover from a knee injury suffered during the New Zealand National Basketball League. Tall Blacks coach Paul Henare says they have lost a lot of leadership with Vukona's withdrawal. The NRL is adamant confidence levels in the refereeing ranks hasn't been dented despite a torrent of criticism and 4 officials being dropped. NRL head of football Graham Annesley has dumped the 4 officials to reserve grade after a string of mistakes in Parramatta's controversial win over the Warriors. The whistleblowers have once again found themselves the centre of unwanted attention in 2019, and Annesley says they're coping with the flack.
But, you know, they're pretty tough in that they've got a really difficult job. They know that their job brings a lot of criticism and, you know, they know their job. They've been doing it a long time. They know what comes with it and they all put their hand up for it.
Graham Annesley says the game could introduce Hawkeye technology as early as next year to rule on offsides, but it's not at a stage where it can be used for forward passes. And the Wallabies star back, Kurtley Beale, has an eye on a 4th Rugby World Cup after signing on with the Waratahs for another Super Rugby season. That's the news.
Tonight on Nights, following the fuss over the 75th anniversary of the D-Day landings, our military historian Damien Fenton remembers what happened next. The Battle of Normandy, because it wasn't plain sailing even after the Allies got off the beaches. And Trevor Reiki has another world of music for you, with everything from herbs to the flamenco raga of the Iberian India fusion outfit India Lucia. On Nights with me, Brian Crump, after the news at 7 on RNZ National.
Now, the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow, Wednesday, Northland, Auckland, Coromandel and Waikato showers, some heavy, frequent for a time tomorrow, possible squally thunderstorms and hail. Waitomo through to Kapiti, including Bay of Plenty in the central high country, showers, some heavy, a period of rain tomorrow, possible thunderstorms and hail in the west, snow to 500 metres later. Gisborne, Hawke's Bay, mainly fine, a few spots of rain this afternoon or tomorrow evening. Wellington, Waited Upper, a few showers, then rain tomorrow, possible thunderstorms and hail. Nelson, Buller and Westland, rain spreading north, clearing to fine tomorrow. Canterbury and Marlborough, high cloud, rain with heavy falls developing tonight. As you heard in the news, snow to 200 metres overnight, rain eases to a few showers tomorrow. Otago, Southland and Fiordland, occasional rain or showers, snow to 300 metres. Chatham Islands, rain, heavy for a time, showers tomorrow. It's coming up to 7 past 6.
Thanks very much, Paul. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Alex Perrottet. The Prime Minister has come under fire for the timing of her trip to Tokelau as tensions continue at Ihumatao in South Auckland. The Maori land dispute has divided political parties, with Simon Bridges now calling Jacinda Ardern a part-time Prime Minister over her decision to leave New Zealand at such a crucial time. Our political reporter Joe Moyer has this story.
On the eve of her trip to Tokelau, Jacinda Ardern went to Auckland and met with some of those involved in the Ihumatao conflict and announced any building development at the site would be halted until a resolution could be found. Simon Bridges says the Prime Minister shouldn't have got involved.
She's put herself right in it, and as I say, where is she? She's gone on a trip for days
to Tokelau, 1,500 people. Well, every MP has a street in New Zealand which she hasn't visited that has many more people than that. And look, whether it's the stalling economy, whether it's Humatau, or whether it is a bunch of other issues, she's showing herself at the moment, and the government's showing itself to be a part-time Prime Minister in government.
Mr Robertson questioned what exactly Mr Bridges was getting at with his part-time dig of Ms Ardern.
And I don't quite know what Simon Bridges was saying when he said the phrase part-time Prime Minister. I do wonder if there's a bit of a sexist overtone in that.
Mr Bridges says everyday New Zealanders should be the priority.
I said at our National Party conference that my bottom line is you. Everyday New Zealanders who are struggling because of what this government's doing to our economy, who've got issues with housing, a land occupation that the Prime Minister has sparked off, and she's gone off to Tokelau. She clearly isn't focused on the issues that matter to New Zealanders.
The backwards and forwards spat flowed into question time, where Mr Robertson challenged Mr Bridges on what he meant by everyday New Zealanders.
The Prime Minister believes that all New Zealanders deserve to see their Prime Minister once in a while. And unlike the previous government, we're not going to ignore the people of Tokelau, nor are we going to behave in such a disrespectful way as the Leader of the Opposition has by suggesting that Tokelauans are not everyday New Zealanders. What did you mean by that, Mr Bridges?
While Ms Ardern and the Labour Māori caucus are backing Mana Whenua to resolve the issue, Mr Bridges says Nationals taking Te Kawerau's side. New Zealand First is also backing the mandated iwi, and Regional Economic Development Minister Shane Jones took aim at what the protesters were wearing when speaking to Radio Wātea this morning.
Look, I've got zero tolerance when I saw some of the personalities out there dressed up in yoga pants. They don't speak for Mana Whenua, and they don't, in my view, represent the long-term interests of Māori traditional leadership.
Asked by RNZ what yoga pants had to do with it, this was his response.
Oh, well, a lot of those people, they're only interested in iwi politics when it accords with their far-left views. And I don't see why they should be given any legitimacy at all within the treaty settlement process. They should all pack up their freedom camping gear and go home.
The Green Party has been at Ihumātao in support of the protesters and is blaming a flawed treaty settlement process for the current mess. Greens co-leader Marama Davidson wouldn't say whether Ms Ardern should have stayed in New Zealand to sort it out. Ms Ardern arrives back on Thursday night, but there's no word yet on whether she will visit Ihumātao on her return. From Parliament for Checkpoint, Joe Moyer.
It's 11 minutes past 6. The government is mulling a proposal from the Auckland Mayor to provide some sort of hardship assistance for businesses badly affected by the construction of the City Rail Link. Over a dozen businesses on Albert Street say they're struggling to make ends meet, with fewer customers weaving their way through the pedestrian detours that have been set up since work began back in 2016. They've been asking for help for some time, and Phil Goff says he's been talking to the government about a possible solution. Our reporter Sarah Robson has more.
Walk down Albert Street and you'll find yourself weaving your way through a series of pedestrian detours with plastic barriers and fencing keeping you out of the City Rail Link construction site. Most of the road is closed to ordinary traffic. There's signage pointing the way to coffee shops, pubs and cafes that used to be much easier to get to. Sonny Corshall owns the iconic Shakespeare Hotel on the corner of Albert and Wyndham Streets. And like many businesses in the area, he's had fewer customers through the doors since the street was torn up for the country's biggest transport project.
The street has become isolated and abandoned for the last 2 years. It has lost the foot traffic, customers and visitors, and the visitors are avoiding to come to the street. And the businesses, as you see over here, their businesses were left to die a slow death.
Sonny Corshall says many of the businesses are struggling to pay their staff, some owners are working second jobs and others are being refused bank loans. He and the other business owners have been crying out for help for some time.
CRL must take responsibility for the business disruption they have caused over the years in the street. And they must pay financial support without any delay.
To date, no financial support has been provided, but the Auckland Mayor, Phil Goff, has gone to the government with a proposal for a hardship fund for any businesses facing extreme hardship.
I'm not asking for a compensation fund. I'm simply saying that in the circumstances of extreme hardship, it would be good if council and government through CRL was able to provide some assistance to help people who have been affected in that way.
Earlier this afternoon, business owners met a group of Auckland councillors, including Mike Lee, Christine Fletcher, Desley Simpson and Wayne Walker, as well as the local MP, Nikki Kay. Ms Kay says if the council and government don't come to the party, there could be implications for other major infrastructure projects in Auckland.
What has happened here is to this group of people has been extraordinary hardship, but if we do not get this right, we will not be able to deliver major infrastructure projects in the future because we will destroy people's lives.
Councillor Mike Lee, who was an early backer of the City Rail link, says the businesses on Albert Street are bearing the brunt of project delays.
Now, this job was meant to be finished months ago, and I walk past every day, it looks like the front line of World War I, and instead of getting better, it seems to get worse.
The Transport Minister, Phil Twyford, says no government has ever made cash payouts to businesses affected by a construction project. He says he is giving the proposal from Phil Goff some thought, but there is no time frame for making a decision. Mō te hōtaka o te ahi, ko Sarah Robson, aho.
Just coming up to 6:15, you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. The US President Donald Trump is being accused of further stoking racial tensions by renewing his attacks on a black congressman and hitting out at one of the country's leading black civil rights activists. At the weekend, he made disparaging remarks about the Democratic Congressman Elijah Cummings and the city of Baltimore, which he represents, calling it a disgusting, rat-infested mess. Those comments were criticised by the civil rights activist Reverend Al Sharpton, leading Mr Trump to call him a con man. Here's CNN's White House correspondent Pamela Brown.
Tonight, President Trump expanding his attacks against Baltimore Congressman Elijah Cummings to include activist Al Sharpton. Trump tweeting Cummings' district has the worst crime statistics in the nation. 25 years of all talk, no action. Adding, so tired of listening to the same old bull. The feud with Cummings began Saturday when the president peppered the Oversight Committee chair with tweets, calling Cummings a racist, claiming his district is the most dangerous anywhere in the U.S., and no human being would want to live there, and a rat-infested mess. Cummings fired back, saying he goes to his district every day and fights for his constituents. Cummings recently subpoenaed Trump's family and complained about the administration's handling of the border crisis. Trump is going after Democratic activist Reverend Al Sharpton for supporting Cummings, saying next Reverend Al will show up to complain and protest, adding Sharpton is just a con man at work. Sharpton was also quick to fire back.
I know Donald Trump, he's not mature enough to take criticism. He can't help it. As far as me being a con man, if he really thought I was a con man, he'd be nominating me for his cabinet.
Noticeably quiet in the feud is close Trump ally and longtime friend of Elijah Cummings, Congressman Mark Meadows. Cummings has previously come to Meadows' defense during a public hearing when he was accused of being racist.
Of all the people on this committee, I've said it and got in trouble for it, that you're one of my best friends. I know that shocks a lot of people.
And likewise, Mr. Chairman.
You are.
Today, Meadows ignored CNN's shouted question off camera about the matter when he was at the White House for a bill signing. The president's chief of staff defending his boss, saying he isn't a racist.
No human being would want to live there.
When Donald Trump attacks
people, this is being perceived as racist. Do you understand why?
I understand why, but that doesn't mean that it's racist. The president is pushing back against what he sees as wrong.
All of this amid a shakeup involving the president's director of national intelligence. The current director, Dan Coates, now out. Trump's choice to replace him, Texas Republican Congressman John Ratcliffe, a member of the House Judiciary Committee, who has less than 5 years of national security experience and who Trump once thought was too nice, according to sources.
Pamela Brown there from Washington at 6:18. Staying with the US, the Secretary of State Mike Pompeo says the United States plans to start withdrawing troops from Afghanistan before the the American presidential election in November next year. It's the clearest indication yet of the Trump administration's determination to extricate the US from the long-running conflict. The BBC's Jill McGivering has the detail.
Speaking in Washington, Mr. Pompeo described his instructions from President Trump as unambiguous. End the endless wars, draw down, he said.
We want them to take their country back, and we want to reduce what is for us tens of billions of dollars a year in expenditures and enormous risk. We think there's a path to reduce violence, achieve reconciliation, and still make sure that American counterterrorism effort in Afghanistan has a value and the potential to reduce risk here in the States.
The president's apparent determination to reduce US presence in Afghanistan has fueled the current intense peace process. Both US and Taliban negotiators suggest their bilateral talks are now close to a deal. But some analysts ask at what cost and what guarantees there'll be on human rights, the rule of law and the future of the Afghan government, which the Taliban refuses to acknowledge.
Jill McGivering with that report. Now, back in 2017, Australia and Timor-Leste agreed to begin negotiations on a permanent maritime boundary between the two countries, potentially ending years of dispute over the lucrative oil-rich Timor Sea. Canberra and Dili agreed to tear up the controversial treaty that divided revenue from Timor-Leste's oil and gas reserves, estimated to be worth $50 billion. But as the ABC's Anne Barker reports, huge delays in actually ratifying the treaty has left Timor-Leste severely out of pocket, and Australia seems to be laughing all the way to the bank.
Ratification of the Maritime Treaty means Australia and Timor-Leste can finally put the long and bitter dispute over oil and gas behind them.
Those that opinion say aye. Aye.
As the treaty passed into law, both sides of Australian politics were talking up the benefits to both countries.
The treaty is an historic achievement for Australia and Timor-Leste, and its implementation is firmly in Australia's national interest.
And key ministers, including Resources Minister Matt Canavan, spoke of Australia's steadfast support for Timor-Leste's prosperity.
It's a historic occasion to mark our burgeoning relationship with Timor-Leste.
But what no minister stated in Parliament is that Australia is refusing to repay the millions of dollars in royalties that have continued to flow its way for each of the 16 months that ratification was delayed. Since the treaty was signed in March last year, Australia has taken 10% of the royalties from the Bayou Undan field that now belongs outright to Timor-Leste. Instead, the ABC has been told the treaty will only deal with the future and not include compensation for the past.
Australia had no right to get 10% of Bayou Undan, that those are violations of Timor-Leste sovereignty.
In Australia's defence, the treaty was negotiated without any provision for compensation, and Timor-Leste only ratified the treaty last week. Nevertheless, economic analyst Charlie Shiner from Lau Hamutuk, a development NGO in Dili, calculates that since Timor-Leste's independence in 2002, Australia has pocketed billions from the Timor Sea.
And if you look at the total amount of money that Australia has taken in from oil and gas fields that it now agrees are in Timor-Leste's territory, it's in the order of $5 billion US dollars, about 7 billion Australian dollars.
It's an even greater loss when you consider that Bayou Undan is Timor-Leste's main source of revenue, but could be exhausted within 4 years. Only recently, the country's former president, Jose Ramos Horta, expressed confidence that Australia would repay the money once the treaty was ratified, while others have accused Australia of deliberately stalling to pocket the extra millions. Charlie Shiner is one of many critics who say there's a moral case for Australia to refund the money.
And we hope that Australia would do the right thing and repay the money that it took from now things that they don't even claim belong to Australia anymore.
Timor-Leste's hopes now lie with the Greater Sunrise Field, which is valued around $50 billion, but could take years to develop.
That's Anne Barker in Jakarta at 6:22. The Minister of Children says it's not possible to immediately end the practice of uplifting children deemed to be at risk. More than 300 people rallied at Parliament today demanding that Oranga Tamariki stop removing children from their whānau. An open letter signed by 17,000 people calling for an end to the practice of removing the children was handed to Green Party co-leader Marama Davidson. Now, Marama Davidson described uplifts as trauma and abuse to protesters today. So I asked Tracy Martin what discussions she'd had with Marama Davidson about the practice.
I've had her fully briefed on the changes that are taking place with Oranga Tamariki to better work with iwi. I've had her fully briefed by officials. I sat down and had conversations with her. We talked about what her comments would be outside to the protests. So I'm literally stunned that those words, if she's using them in the context of Oranga Tamariki.
And when you had that meeting with Marama Davidson, what were her comments? What were her comments to you about what she would say?
Basically, she said she was very supportive of the changes that were happening with Oranga Tamariki. She understood them fully now that I had had her briefed by officials. She wanted to help me in any way, shape or form that she could to continue to work with iwi as we have been over the last year to better support prevention and early intervention, and that she undertook from me that she would ask the protesters to stop threatening Oranga Tamariki social workers.
So how helpful is this as a government partner that the co-leader of the Green Party is out there characterising the situation as torture and abuse?
I can't speak for the government and the government relationship because that would be sort of above my pay grade. But from my perspective, with regard to my desire to continue to work with iwi and Maori organisations, with families that are under stress around New Zealand, so that we can deliver on the vision of the expert advisory panel and finally have a child protection service and start stopping children coming into our care, I would suggest that statements like that probably aren't helpful.
1, 2, 3, 4, you will take our kids no more. There were not that many protesters outside. Perhaps the rain kept a lot of them away, but they were certainly very passionate and very hard to argue with. Dame Tariana Turia was there and calling for a halt on all uplifts of Maori children. She said effective immediately. How do you characterise that call?
Well, it's not possible. So it's not possible at the moment because there are still children whose lives are in danger, and there are children who are terribly neglected and treated badly. Every 2 days, a child in this country shows up at a hospital with a non-accidental injury. We've had 3 little people pass away since that video went live that created the momentum for this protest. So it's easy to say, but it's not going to happen. But I am dedicated to, and actually I sat down with Tiriana Turia in Wanganui only a fortnight ago when I spoke with other kaumātua and kuia there and said that I absolutely will work with them to find what will work for their community to prevent and to, as early intervention and prevention methods so that we can stop children coming into Oranga Tamariki's care.
It's very hard to argue with a mother like many who've spoken to us and to some of our programs, and probably people that travelled a good way down the country to be there at Parliament today, who say that their tamariki are returned 5 years later and the words used are broken, abused, devastated. Are you confident that those sorts of situations are historic and not ongoing?
Oranga Tamariki, the expert advisory panel made it very clear that we had to change from what was the child, youth and family situation. And I don't know how many of the people down there dealt with child, youth and family as opposed to have been dealing with Oranga Tamariki. But the expert advisory panel said it would take a minimum of 5 years and investment of billions of dollars to change what was a child crisis service into a child protection service. So it's not there yet. No, it's not. Only 29 days ago did I get the $1.1 billion that I need to really start rebuilding this.
It's been a while since the name change, so perhaps you could tell us, apart from the name change, what's been the biggest and best change?
I would say the biggest and best change in the last year, because it's only been 2 years since the Oranga Tamariki has actually been in existence, have been the strategic partnerships with iwi, Ngāi Tahu, Ngāpui and Waikato Tainui, which have stopped children coming into Oranga Tamariki's care. Increases in social workers, increases in caregivers and their training. So all of that has been the best thing, I believe, that has taken place since those changes.
I think this is the 18th review or inquiry over 30 years. How confident are you that this one will work?
That's not true, and that's a problem that we've had. So you've got John Tamahiri saying it's the 14th review in 22 years. Oranga Tamariki is 2 years old. It is nothing like SIFS was.
Well, it's a change of name. It's effectively the same organisation. You can't be fooling yourself about that, surely.
That is not true. And so there are 6 cabinet papers that have gone through, a completely different operating model, more money than has ever been put into this child protection service than ever before was put in just 29 days ago. This is not child, youth and family, and it has never had a review that it has failed. So people need to recognise the moment what the expert advisory panel said and the fact we are trying to rebuild rather than continuing to attack for the work that was done before Oranga Tamariki existed.
Have you spoken to Oranga Tamariki staff? I know you don't get so involved in those operational matters, but you are across the detail. What have you told the staff while these reviews are ongoing?
What I've asked the staff to do is to keep protecting children. I'm very aware that many of our staff have been abused, have received threatening messages, they've had to shut down social media accounts, that they have, personally, they have felt that they have been threatened and unsafe. But they have continued to show up at work. They have continued to put the children that we know in this country that are at risk. So I've just asked them and thanked them for continually doing their job while we continue to change from a child crisis service to a child protection service.
Minister, what would you say is the common denominator in these uplift stories? Is it addiction, perhaps? Is it poverty?
Yeah. There's those are the stresses, although not everybody who's poor finds themselves mistreating their children. So let's be clear, it's not a single marker here. But what it says is we as a country need to be supporting our families more. We need to be funding prevention and early intervention services across the board to stop our families getting to this place of crisis where they are harming their children. And I do believe that Māori have answers for Māori. I believe community have answers for community. And I want to work more closely to the ground, and I am instructing Oranga Tamariki to do that, to find those solutions, because no government department can raise a child. A child needs to be raised in a family, and whether that's hopefully their immediate mum and dad, but if it's their wider family, whether it be iwi or hapu, they would do much better there than they would do with any government department.
Minister for Children Tracy Martin there. That's all for Checkpoint this evening. We'll catch you tomorrow. Ka kite anō.
RNZ News headlines at just after 6:30. Good evening. A mother protesting against Oranga Tamariki taking Māori children